If there's one person in this world that seethingly hates Caitlin Clark, then it has to be Sheryl Swoopes. I mean, if you guys remember, Swoopes was one of the first people who took a swipe at Caitlin even before she stepped foot into the WNBA.
This isn't just for Caitlin, but you asked me about Caitlin. If you're going to break a record, to me, if it's legitimate, you have to break that record in the same amount of time that that player set it.
Okay.
Right? If this player did it in this amount of time, then you should do it in that same amount of time. Caitlin Clark right now probably takes about 40 shots a game.
Now, even though everything she said on Gilbert's podcast was proven to be a bunch of lies,
she went on Gilbert Arenas' podcast, and here are some of the things that she had to say about Caitlin. She said that Caitlin Clark is a 25-year-old beating up on young kids, which she is currently 22. She said that Caitlin Clark takes about 40 shots per game, but Caitlin Clark had 22.3 field goal attempts for just this past season at Iowa.
WNBA legend didn't stop there, as she continued dissing Caitlin when she started playing in the league, to the extent that she even called her a bully.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about bullies, we can talk about every time Caitlin has the ball, she pushes off.
And when the WNBA recently crowned Caitlin Clark as the Player of the Week after dropping 25 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists, Swoopes didn't even bother to comment on it and just sat in complete silence for 30 seconds. At this point, Swoopes is just rubbing it in on Caitlin Clark's fans. But see, even though the Fever is on a hot streak at the time of this video, by winning several of their last few games since the Olympic break, Swoopes had found another way to disrespect Caitlin when she talked about the Fever on her podcast.
I think the Olympic break really helped Indiana. They look like they've spent time, whether they took time off or not, but they worked on stuff. This Indiana team, I'm going to say shout out to Lexi Hull. I'm a big Lexi Hull fan. Watch her in AU. Lexi Hull shot the leather off the ball in their game against Seattle and just couldn't miss. Kelsey Mitchell is just stroking. She is just shooting the basketball. Aaliyah Boston, almost a triple-double. I know we're talking about teams where they can move and things changing, but if Indiana continues to play the way they're playing like this, they too are going to move up in the standings.
As you heard from the clip, Swoopes purposefully left out Caitlin in the conversation, even though the entire world knows that she's the reason why the Fever is thriving right now. I mean, don't get me wrong, she has every right to give a big shout out to Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, and Lexi Hull for having a solid game in their recent win against the Seattle Storm, but the fact that she didn't even mention Caitlin's name, who, by the way, had 23 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists in the same game, is just totally ridiculous and insulting on Caitlin's part. Anyway, after discreetly taking shots at Caitlin, Swoopes' eyebrow-raising statement met a ton of backlash as expected, one of which came from Stephen A. Smith, who didn't mince words about Swoopes' unjust hatred towards Caitlin, and had this to say.
So no, Caitlin Clark. Sheryl Swoopes. No, Caitlin Clark. Respectfully, Sheryl Swoopes, you have any idea how that makes you look? You have any idea how that serves to stain any kind of critique of Caitlin Clark, because that gives fodder to those who believe she's being hated on and ostracized to some degree? Do you realize that, Sheryl Swoopes, you're insane to do that? Let me tell you why you're insane to do that. Because Sheryl Swoopes, you're one of the greatest players ever in the history of basketball. That's why. See, you won a championship in college at Texas Tech. You won 3 Olympic gold medals. You won 4 WNBA championships. You know basketball. You know basketball better than me. You know basketball than any of the pundits. You know basketball better than most of the men that play basketball. There is no way in hell you just accidentally left Caitlin Clark's name out of that soliloquy that you dropped about the Indiana Fever. Stop it. How was the attendance for Team USA in the Olympics? What would it have been like if Caitlin Clark was playing on that team? Go ahead and look. Everywhere you turn, Indiana Fever is breaking records. All Sheryl Swoopes did was validate all the speculation that there's folks hating on Caitlin Clark. That's all she did. Because to know basketball like Sheryl Swoopes does, to be as accomplished as she is, to be the Hall of Famer that she is. All accolades that are well-deserved. How do you talk about the Indiana Fever and mention a multitude of players and not one of them is Caitlin Clark, who, by the way, as a rookie is leading the league in assists? How do you do that? How do you do that? No matter how great you were as a player, Sheryl Swoopes, there is no woman who should negate mentioning Caitlin Clark and what Caitlin Clark is doing for the game.
So right after Stephen A. ripped her apart by dropping those truth bombs, many people sided with the ESPN analyst. But see, it didn't take that long for Sheryl to clap back at him, as she responded to him on her X account saying, "You talk about whomever and whatever you want on your podcast, correct? So why can't I? Also, did you listen to the entire episode? Nope. I have a personal relationship with these players and they deserve recognition as well." Which she followed up with another post saying, "Do you talk about them or others in the league and give them their props? I hope y'all take all of this energy to the polls and vote." Anyway, it seems pretty clear that Swoopes' intention is for people and the media to talk about the other stars in the WNBA. However, while her intention is good, the thing is that she's doing it while disrespecting and dissing the name of Caitlin Clark in the process. I mean, I totally get her point that people should also recognize the other great players that are balling out in the WNBA right now. But see, here's the cold, hard fact that Sheryl doesn't get. No one really knew about these players that she's talking about until Caitlin Clark arrived on the scene and brought crazy amounts of eyeballs to the WNBA. I mean, not to disrespect or anything, but just to be brutally honest here, no one really cared, nor knew about Aaliyah Boston, Lexi Hull, Kelsey Mitchell, or the entire Indiana Fever team before Caitlin got drafted and made them all relevant. And so, to blatantly downplay what she has done, not just for the WNBA but for women's basketball as a whole, just shows how big of a Caitlin Clark hater Sheryl Swoopes really is. Anyway, going back to her post earlier, she also blasted Stephen A. for judging her right away, even though he only listened to a portion of her podcast. Well, to save Stephen A. some time, I actually took the liberty to listen to her podcast. And to my surprise, listening to the entirety of it only proves even further that she's not a fan of Cece. Because after leaving Caitlin out of the equation regarding the Fever's recent success, here's what she talked about next.
So, before I get into that, I am going to say this. Shout out to Angel Reese, even in a loss. Listen, 20 boards.
It's crazy.
20 boards. Say what you want to say about how she's getting all these rebounds. Can get 20 rebounds. I don't care if you're rebounding your own. But the thing is with Angel just has a knack for the basketball. Angel
really
is
crazy.
just going to go get the basketball. And she is constantly giving her team more possessions.
So, after subtly taking shots at Cece, she quickly jumped into glazing Angel Reese for having back-to-back games with 20 rebounds. Now, although Swoopes was right in praising her as those numbers are truly historic for a rookie, she didn't bother to reveal the outcome of those games so that her listeners wouldn't downplay Reese's impressive feats. See, here's what Swoopes doesn't want her listeners to know about. Right after taking a long break coming from the Paris Olympics, Reese and the Chicago Sky traveled on the road and got a 20-point beating in the hands of the Phoenix Mercury. Then, after winning against the Aces, they lost in the rematch versus the Mercury with the same amount of points before dropping another game against the Connecticut Sun, even though Reese had 20 boards in those last two outings. Now, on the other hand, Caitlin had a mini revenge tour right after the Olympic break, scoring a big win against Diana Taurasi and the Phoenix Mercury, where she dropped 29 points and 10 assists. And then, in the next game, she led the Fever to another win, this time against the Seattle Storm, where she racked up 23 points, 9 assists, and 5 rebounds. I mean, you see the difference there? Like, even though Caitlin has led her team to back-to-back wins while posting monster stat lines, Swoopes neglects this fact and chooses to look the other way instead. And while she was glazing about Reese's achievement of being the first rookie to ever notch 20 rebounds in 2 consecutive games, she never talked about, nor at least congratulated Caitlin Clark on breaking the rookie assist record set by Tisha Panachiro, which she set more than 2 decades ago by registering 232 assists during the Seattle Storm game. And on top of breaking that record, she also now owns the record for the most rookie assists in a season, and most assists in a game for any WNBA player after she dished out 19 assists versus the Dallas Wings. Then, she also became the fastest player to reach 400 points and 200 assists. the first ever rookie to record a triple-double, the first ever rookie to have most double-doubles in terms of points and assists, and lastly, she became the only WNBA player who received the most number of votes in the All-Star game, with 700,000 votes across her name. But see, despite all these, have you heard Sheryl Swoopes glazing over Cece? You know, talking about this stuff on her podcast, or at least highlighting the remarkable things that Caitlin has achieved so far as a rookie? Well, I think you guys know the answer to that. I mean, the hypocrisy and the double standard that Swoopes just showed there really puts her in a bad light. And despite her numerous attempts to defend herself in public, it's now too late for her to save herself. It's now too late for her to save herself, as she's now completely exposed for what she really is underneath. Anyway, having said all of this, the only reason I could think of why she had this seething hate towards Caitlin since day one is because she's not black enough.
I'm gonna say this, and then I wanna be done with this whole conversation. So for people to come at me and say that I made those comments because I'm a racist, first of all, black people can't be racist. I grew up in a very small West Texas town, predominantly white. My best childhood friend is white. That's not a part of my DNA. But for me, it's very important though that I'm a black woman, you know? So it's important for me that I speak up for people that look like me. It's Black History Month. So, our ancestors fought and died for us to have opportunities that we have today. So anytime I have an opportunity to obviously be on the podcast or anything where I feel like it's important for me to speak up and show support, that's what I want to do. I have no issues with Caitlin. Her breaking the record, I think obviously is a tremendous accomplishment, although, we could get into that discussion also.